Today I want to deep dive into the amazing piece of research by the very famous VC firm a16z, created by the legendary entrepreneur Andreessen Horowitz. I think this piece of research gives us potentially the best insight into how things have changed when it comes to enterprise, so those with the big money pockets, buying AI products today. Specifically in today's episode, I'm going to talk about 3 things that I think I learned from reading their paper. The research was based on interviews and surveys with over 100 different CIOs, so Chief Information Officers, across 5 different industries. Now, these are the people that buy big AI products for their companies. And what it shows us is how things have really changed when it comes to AI purchasing. As you'll see in today's episode, one thing's for certain, the scale and speed of this adoption within an enterprise. So if you're building or selling AI, if you're working at a big company, or just trying to figure out how the world of AI is changing, you're going to want to listen to the research findings in today's episode. This is In the Loop with Jack Horn. I hope you enjoy the show. So I think we'll start with something that I find particularly interesting and really resonated with me. So 2 years ago, if you talk to any big companies about AI, typically the conversation was about how they can build these AI solutions internally. So they all have IT teams with developers. And a lot of the leaders were thinking that we need to build our own AI capabilities, or we can't rely on third parties for something that's strategic, or the desire to maintain control over, I guess, the AI destiny of that company. And these were the sort of things you'd hear a lot. The conversation has completely changed now. And I mean completely. The research found that 90% of enterprise are now testing third-party applications for things like customer support. And what's really funny is that customer support was one of the areas where companies started to build an internal solution, because obviously it seemed straightforward. The use case was clear, the ROI was really obvious, yet 9 out of 10 companies now are actively looking to buy rather than build. And it makes sense. Previously, there wasn't solutions that were ready-made for people to buy. And instead, people were piecing together different pieces of technology and infrastructure to create a solution. And companies like Mindset have provided basically all of that infrastructure inside an AI development platform that's all integrated and works really easily to make it really simple for companies to build new features and things on top of it. But again, a couple of years ago, this just didn't exist. People had to innovate, had to really figure out which parts of the technology they should pick and how to glue it together and what to build on top of it. For example, the research said that in financial services, over 75% of customer support implementations are now just using third-party applications. Even in industries like manufacturing, so traditionally quite a conservative industry because of compliance, has now gone to about 60% of them buying AI applications. And in the research, it actually cited a financial technology company discussing this build versus buy dilemma. And now this financial technology company's had a dedicated team. Apparently they were making really good progress, and they said they were about 60% done. But when it came to new solutions popping up, they did a competitive analysis and decided we're now going to buy this and not build it. And basically because the AI native applications that they were buying are just better. And this is evident in some AI native applications in the world right now, because, you know, some CTOs of big companies are saying that 90% of their code is AI generated from platforms like Cursor or Claude. And 90% is just a crazy number. You know, just 12 months ago, that was about 10 to 15% of code all generated by AI. And the fact that it's now gone from 1 in 10 lines of code to 9 in 10 lines of code in just 12 months is kind of madness. It blows my mind a little bit. And now this is all data that's in that research report. Now you may ask then, okay, so people are now buying versus building, but I guess what is driving this? So when researchers asked these big enterprise CIOs why they preferred AI native applications, and they said it was just, they were faster to innovate, and also the fact that they're building this from the ground up around AI makes just a fundamentally better experience. It's like the early days maybe of cloud computing, where initially every enterprise was trying to build their own cloud infrastructure. And then obviously AWS and many other big providers popped along, and they just did it so much better. And it obviously became ridiculous to build your own. And I think we're seeing the same pattern play out with AI applications at the enterprise level. So if you're a technology vendor, so you're a SaaS provider right now, I think you need to move really, really fast and move like your life depends on it. Because clearly you've got an opportunity to grab, whether it's market share, do really incredible things because enterprise now want to buy best-in-class solutions. And the data on user satisfaction in the report backs all of this up. The research found that AI-native solutions are averaging an NPS, or a Net Promoter Score, from their customers. So when customers vote on whether they like something or not, are at 40 to 50 points higher than a traditional SaaS company. That's a huge number. Now, I promise this isn't just a happy coincidence, but our proposition to customers who are SaaS companies and technology providers is essentially we're a development platform that helps them become an AI native technology provider. And we're seeing all of these same trends play out in real time because essentially we allow product management and dev teams to build customer facing AI features on our platform and then plug it into their product so they become magical and AI driven. And what we're seeing at the moment is a huge number of people, I guess, retrofit chatbots into their product. But an AI native company, this AI native technology provider, everything's controlled by AI. Everything's just controlled by natural language. You tell the application what to do and then it does things for you. And I think over time we'll start to see all interfaces melt away because really people just want to have a conversation and something happens and then you're given the results of that. And I think that's where all technology providers are going to be moving to over the next, probably, I mean, I'm always ambitious and probably overly optimistic. I want to say 18 months. In reality, this is a journey that's going to go on for many years. But yeah, I think the research was just spot on here. So again, that build versus buy dilemma is ending at an enterprise buying cycle, and it's being driven by AI native platforms and products just being so much better. Now let's move to another key thread, I think, that was quite apparent in the research, which is, I guess, just this huge budget explosion. So when it comes to new technologies, typically you see gradual adoption. So you see pilot programs like with Sin, then people start small, and then a slow budget growth as technology becomes really useful and helpful and accepted everywhere. And it was only last year that a lot of Wall Street, for example, was asking, will AI ever be helpful? Will it ever be accepted and bought by enterprise on a large scale outside of pilots? And so far, again, more predictions have been shown to be wildly false because AI has broken all of the rules. The research found that enterprise AI budgets have now grown 75% beyond what companies had actually projected spending. So they're spending 75% more than they thought they would be spending. And these were already quite aggressive projections. And what's even crazier about is that enterprise leaders are now predicting another 75% growth over the next year. To put that into context, typical enterprise software budgets increase maybe at 10 to 15% every year. So it's just a massive amount of spend and growth here in the AI sector. And the numbers aren't just part of this kind of insane story. Because what's really interesting is where the money's coming from. Because last year, all the money was coming from innovation budgets, which are basically R&D. And essentially what that means is experiments. And that made up about 25% of total AI spending. Yet this year in 2025, that's dropped to 7%. So that drop to 7% means that AI has, I guess, graduated from this experimental technology to now something that's obviously core to the business's strategy. Because companies aren't funding this from R&D budgets. They're funding it out of their core IT budgets. 77% from the research, or according to the research, comes from IT budgets now, 16% from a business unit, and only 7% from that innovation fund. Now, this shift, I think, has just huge implications that most people probably don't fully appreciate yet. When you're spending innovation budgets, you can just afford to experiment. You can pilot things, you can accept failure, you can try crazy ideas. But when you're spending core IT budgets, you need reliability, a proven and guaranteed return on investment. You need vendors who can deliver at an enterprise scale. And this is exactly why I think the budget shift is reversing that build versus buy. When you have an innovation budget, you could justify building things internally just because learning is part of the value. But when you have that core IT budget, you need solutions that work and you need them today. So in terms of the reasoning behind this, I guess, budget explosion, the research highlighted two core things. First, it says enterprises are discovering loads of new use cases that they never really expected. Things like internal enterprise search, data analysis, processing documents. And they're seeing rates of between 60 and 80% adoption across a company, which is a huge number. I mean, if anyone's ever been given a new HR software, how many people ever log into those things? Second, which is really interesting, which is customer-facing use cases. are now starting to emerge at companies at scale. So one of the large technology providers that were interviewed as part of the research said that they've been mostly focused on internal use cases so far, but now what they're going to be doing is shifting budget and effort into customer-facing AI solutions. I promise this isn't a terrible sponsored ad. It is just a happy coincidence, because this is exactly what Mindset is seeing. This is what we do. We allow technology companies to build customer-facing AI into their products. And we're seeing this at scale. You know, agentic experiences and AI automations happening inside technology providers' platforms is quite a magical experience, and something that's really difficult to achieve. You know, one of our customers actually had 20 pages of customer-facing use cases that they were launching. And what's really funny here is internal use cases has limits. You know, an internal tool will always have that natural limit. You can only automate so many internal processes. But when it comes to customer-facing applications, well, there's just almost unlimited numbers of them. So yeah, obviously this trend is particularly good for a Mindset, as well as many LLM providers, you know, which obviously make a lot of money based on anyone ever using any form of AI application. Anyway, let's move on to the third and final key trend or theme that I think came from this research, which is actually how wrong most of us were when it came to large language model providers. And this is where I personally was wrong. I predicted something and now I have egg on my face. So conventional wisdom says that as a technology matures, they consolidate. So enterprise will pick a winner, big companies buy the smaller ones, everyone standardizes on typical platforms, and they drive down costs through volume. Now, the AI market is actually, funny enough, doing the exact opposite of that. And last year, it felt like the large language model space was following the same pattern. They seem to be converging and becoming more and more similar, and hard to tell, you know, which was better or why would I use this one over that one. And everyone thinks that the benchmarks are still silly. And really, we were assuming that that space was becoming incredibly commoditized. So it was only ever going to become cheaper and cheaper, which it is, but that there's no differentiation on models anymore. Well, we were all wrong, because now 37% of enterprises are now using 5 or more models in production. So not in testing, not in pilots, in full production. So that's up by 29% in the last 12 months alone. And when you look at experimentation, so companies experiment with different models, that number jumps to 52% are now testing over 5 models. Now, maybe at first glance, you might think, obviously, that's just because no company wants to be locked into using a single large language model, because enterprises have obviously learned that putting all your eggs in one basket, and that basket being a single technology provider, is always quite dangerous. But the research show that this isn't the case. The main driver is actually optimizing for performance based on specific use cases. Now, for those that listen to this podcast every single week, I've covered how certain large language models have really specialized in certain use cases, and they've done incredibly well for it. And what I think this research shows people is that most of us have been missing a key fact, which is that the enterprise large language model provider layer has not been commoditized. Instead, it's actually specialized, which is, again, the exact opposite of what everyone thought would happen just 12 months ago. So some examples from the research were that Anthropic's models excelled at coding tasks. We've discussed that on the podcast before. But what's really interesting is actually nuance and specialization even within coding tasks. So Claude is seen to perform better on very detailed, fine-grained coding tasks, while Google Gemini is actually supposed to be better at high-level system design and architecture conversations. So it's really interesting how even within a use case, there is sub-use cases that models are now specializing towards. However, what is very clear from the research is that when it comes to dominance, OpenAI has dominated everything. They have overall market share leadership. 67% of OpenAI users have deployed non-frontier models in production, compared to just 41% for Google and only 27% of Anthropic. So it just shows that even though many of us criticize, I guess, the number of language models that OpenAI have, and gosh, how do I choose between this one or that one? Well, it's worked very well for them. But I don't know how long that will last. Google is rising really quickly. And according to the research, especially with big companies with minimum of 10,000 employees. And I guess part of that is they've got a lot of relationships with big enterprise, lots of brand trust. And also, most importantly, is cost. For example, Gemini 2.5 costs 26 cents per 1 million tokens, while GPT-4.1 costs 70 cents. So this means that Google is nearly 3 times cheaper. So price could become a major factor for these big companies when deciding which models they choose. But the challenge for these big companies is that switching costs become higher. So we've talked a lot on this podcast about what an agent actually is, which is just a set of configuration, which essentially is a way of organizing different prompts to an LLM on how it should behave in certain circumstances. And second, it's a set of integrations and ability to orchestrate those different tools. But here's where things get quite complex, because as big enterprises are now building more and more sophisticated agentic workflows, so we've talked about this, the ability to tell the agent to do this, then that, and then that, actually makes it very difficult to switch between models. So the research shows that 68% of enterprise now find it either difficult or very difficult to switch models, which is up from 43% last year. And a good example of this is one of the CIO quotes they referenced, which is that the CIO said, all of our prompts and our systems have been worked and built around OpenAI. Each one has a specific set of instructions and details, and so it's a very big task to now swap that out. So this creates quite a fascinating dynamic, which this multi-model approach gives enterprises lots of flexibility and ability to optimize based on performance in the short term. But as these individual workflows become more complex and sophisticated, switching becomes more and more expensive. So if I'm a large language model provider, essentially lots of different models and a strong performance in specific tasks is going to do really well long term. So yeah, really, really interesting themes. But if I take a step back about what I think that means for, I guess, business leaders, technology leaders, people in this space, I think first and foremost, for those that are building technology, it's the best time in the world to be building technology. Because actually this build versus buy shift signals that the application layer is maturing so fast. We're moving to a world where those with the best products are starting to win. And this is following the exact same pattern as you saw with cloud computing or mobile app development and pretty much every single major technology platform. But the speed is just something that's never been seen before. You know, these transitions typically take 5, 6, 7 years, but this is happening in 18 months. I think second, this budget explosion really tells us this isn't a bubble or a fad. You know, where enterprises are actually spending their core budgets on AI applications, it shows that if you are in this space, you have an opportunity to really take massive leaps forward. But the challenge is you need to really be a genuinely best-in-class product to win. So yeah, if you are in the space, I hope this research acts as another kick up the bum to move faster. Anyway, thanks for today. I hope you found that helpful, and I will see you next week.